In a quiet little village, surrounded by emerald hills and whispering woods, lived a kind-hearted boy named David, the small boy. His home was a tiny wooden cottage on the edge of the village, where he lived with his gentle, loving mother. They didn't have much. No gold, no big house, no fancy food, but they had something more precious than all those things: love, warmth, and kindness. David, the small boy, had a sparkle in his eyes and dreams bigger than the sky. Every morning, he'd wake before the sun, wash his face in a cold stream nearby, and pack his worn school bag. To reach the village school, he had to walk through a deep, twisting forest, one that most children were afraid of. But not David. He loved the sound of rustling leaves, the way sunlight dripped through the trees, and the hidden world of chirping birds and shy animals. As he walked, he would whisper his hopes to the wind. I wish to help others. I wish to be brave. I wish to see real fairies in fairy dress one day. He didn't know if anyone was listening, but he kept wishing anyway. One cool spring morning, David, the small boy, was at school when he saw a younger child crying near the water pump. His clothes were wet and his lunchbox had spilled. Without hesitation, David knelt beside him, helped him clean up, and even shared half of his own lunch. The boy looked up with big watery eyes and said something strange. Thank you. May all your wishes come true? David smiled politely, not realizing how important those words would become. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the birds sang their sleepy songs, David walked home through the forest as usual. But something unusual caught his eye near a pile of Muscovade rocks. A faint, golden shimmer. Curious, he stepped closer. There, half hidden beneath fallen leaves, was an ancient-looking book. Its cover was faded, made of leather, and covered in vines that seemed to move gently, as if alive. He picked it up carefully. The book felt warm in his hands. Back home, his mother was stirring soup over the fire. David, wash up. Supper's ready, she called. Yes, Mama, he replied, slipping the book into his school bag. Later that night, in the flickering candlelight, David opened the mysterious book. On the first page, in glimmering silver ink, were the words, Welcome to the Fairyland, a realm of light, beauty, and dreams. His heart pounded. He turned the page. Suddenly, the candlelight seemed to brighten on its own. The page wasn't just a drawing. It was alive. He saw fairies in fairy dress, delicate and glowing, flying around a silver lake, surrounded by crystal trees. Their wings shimmered like glass petals, and they laughed as they danced on lily pads. David leaned closer, eyes wide. He slowly reached out and placed his hand on the magical scene. Whoosh! A surge of golden light burst from the page, wrapping around his fingers, his arms, his whole body. He tried to move, but it felt like the wind was pulling him gently into the book. He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he was no longer in his room. He was inside the picture. The air smelled like honey and wildflowers. The ground sparkled beneath his feet. Above him, butterflies the size of birds fluttered in soft patterns. All around, fairies in fairy dress soared through the sky, their laughter as sweet as music. David, the small boy, stood there in awe, mouth slightly open. Then, one fairy in fairy dress, with silver hair and soft pink wings, flew close to him and smiled. Welcome, David, the small boy. We've been expecting you. The fairy in fairy dress who had welcomed David, the small boy, floated down gracefully and landed on a patch of glowing moss. Her wings folded gently behind her back, and her eyes sparkled with warmth. My name is Asha, she said with a gentle bow. This is our world, Fairyland. You've entered it because your heart is kind, your wishes were heard, and your spirit is brave. David, the small boy, looked around in wonder. The skies above him rippled with soft shades of pink and lavender. Trees taller than anything he had ever seen stretched into the sky, their leaves made of translucent crystal. A stream sang as it ran over smooth pebbles, and little animals with feathered ears and glowing tails peeked from behind mushrooms the size of umbrellas. Is this real? David whispered. Asha giggled like wind chimes. As real as your dreams, David, the small boy. Come, meet the others, She took his hand, and they flew. Yes, flew across fields of bluegrass and rainbow flowers. They passed flocks of fairies in fairy dress playing hide-and-seek in the clouds, and saw others painting the sky with soft beams of sunlight. Eventually, they reached the heart of Fairyland, a wide open space surrounding a silver lake that shimmered, even though there was no sun. In the center of the lake, rising from a floating stone, was a beautiful palace made of glass, leaves, and moonlight. As they arrived, dozens of fairies in fairy dress came forward, greeting David with cheers and laughter. Some gave him petals that hummed like lullabies. Others braided tiny blossoms into his hair. For the first time in his life, David, the small boy, felt like he belonged somewhere magical. "You are the first human child to come here in many, many years," said one elder fairy in fairy dress. Then a hush fell over the gathering. The waters of the lake parted. A long bridge of silver light extended to the shore. From the far end, a royal procession of fairies in fairy dress emerged. At the center walked the fairy in fairy dress queen, taller and grander than the rest. Her crown sparkled with stars, and her gown flowed like melted silver. She stopped before David. "We welcome you, David, the small boy," she said in a voice like a flute played on a soft breeze. "You have a rare heart, kind, brave, and full of hope. It is hearts like yours that keep our world alive." David, overwhelmed, bowed his head. "Thank you, Your Majesty." "I don't know why I'm here, but I'm so glad I came." The queen smiled and nodded. "You are here because your wish was true. And now, Fairyland is your friend." The fairies in fairy dress sang and danced. That night, under a sky full of 2 moons, they held a celebration in David's honor. He tasted glowing fruit, danced with stardust, and listened to flowers whisper secrets. But as the music faded and the lake grew still, David, the small boy, sat near its edge and thought of his mother. "She must be worried," he whispered. "I have to go back." Asha appeared beside him. She didn't look surprised. "Yes," she said softly, "we knew you'd want to return, and you must. But don't worry, David, the small boy, whenever you wish to see us again, just open the book. We'll be waiting." She handed him a small moon-shaped charm and waved her wand. A golden spiral of light wrapped around him once more. When David, the small boy, opened his eyes, he was back in his room. The candle had burned low. The magical book lay close beside his schoolbooks. For a moment, he wondered if it had all been a dream. But then he noticed the moon-shaped charm in his hand, still glowing softly. He smiled. Fairyland was real, and his journey was only beginning. The days that followed were busy. David, the small boy, focused on his school exams and chores. He still walked through the forest every day, whispering wishes to the trees. But he hadn't opened the magical book again. It stayed safely hidden under a loose wooden plank in the corner of his room, right next to the moon-shaped charm that still faintly glowed in the dark. He missed Fairyland deeply. At night, when the wind howled or when he saw the stars twinkling above the cottage roof, he thought of Asha, the fairies in fairy dress, the shimmering lake, and the silver palace. One quiet morning, after his final exam, he woke up early and decided, "Today, I will visit Fairyland again." With excitement bubbling in his chest, he lifted the floorboard and took out the old book. He opened it carefully. The first page still shimmered with the magical image of Fairyland. The lake, the trees, the palace. It was all there, alive and perfect. But when he turned to the next page, his heart dropped. The next image was not beautiful. It was horrifying. The lake was dry. The trees were burnt. The sky was black, filled with smoke and flames. Everywhere, fairies in fairy dress lay injured or unconscious. Some clung to broken flower stems. Others cried beside the withered bushes. The palace! It had collapsed. David, the small boy, felt like crying. "What happened?" he whispered. He reached out his hand and, just as before, touched the picture. A brilliant, chaotic light burst forth, and once again, he was pulled in. When he opened his eyes, he was back in Fairyland. But it was not the land he remembered. The sky above him churned with dark clouds, Ash fell like black snow. The once beautiful flowers were wilted and gray. Trees leaned like they were grieving. He ran, calling out, "Asha! Asha? Where are you?" Then he saw her, huddled beneath a twisted vine, her wings tattered and dirt on her cheeks. "David, you came back," she said weakly. He knelt beside her, horrified. "What happened? Where is everyone? Where is the queen?" Asha wiped a tear and said in a trembling voice, "A giant, a dark sorcerer, came to our land 3 days ago. He brought fire and poison. He destroyed the lake, stole the queen's magical ring, and trapped her in his castle. That ring holds the life force of all fairies in fairy dress. Without it, we grow weaker. Soon, we will fade away forever." David, the small boy, felt a strange courage rise inside him. "Then I have to help. Tell me where he is." Asha gasped. "No, he's too powerful. He lives in the Black Castle, hidden deep in the shadowed forest. It's a place no fairy can survive." But David shook his head. "I'm not a fairy. I'm a boy. I'm not afraid." Asha looked at him with awe. She stood, wobbling slightly, and reached into the folds of her dress. She pulled out a wand made of crystal. "Take this," she said. "It will light your way, even in the darkest night." Then she gently tapped her wings and transformed into a small glowing bird, landing on David's shoulder. "I will guide you," she whispered. David, the small boy, nodded once, firmly, and turned toward the darkness in the distance. His journey had begun. The land before David, the small boy, was no longer filled with glowing petals or laughing fairies in fairy dress. It was a wasteland once vibrant, now silent. The light seemed to fade the deeper he walked. Trees leaned inward, whispering dark secrets. Every few steps, he saw burned fairy wings, broken tiaras, shattered blossoms. Asha, still in the form of a tiny glowing bird, sat lightly on his shoulder. Her soft whispers guided him. "This way, past the dead ivy. Don't step on the black moss. It's cursed." David, the small boy, held the crystal wand tightly in one hand and his courage in the other. Every time he felt afraid, he remembered his promise. "I will save Fairyland." As night crept into the land, the forest turned even darker. Strange eyes glowed from the underbrush. Twisted vines slithered like snakes. A sharp wind howled through the branches like the cries of forgotten creatures. But the wand glowed brighter with every step. It pulsed with warmth, as if it could sense David's bravery. Then, after hours of walking, he saw it. The Black Castle! It rose from the ground like a mountain made of shadow. The walls were rough and uneven, with jagged towers clawing at the sky. A cold mist swirled at its base, and strange black bats circled above. David, the small boy, stopped. He took a deep breath. "We're here," he said to Asha. She flew from his shoulder and circled above him before landing on a nearby rock. "The castle is full of traps. The sorcerer giant knows we would come," she warned. "But I know a secret way in." Asha flapped her wings and flew to a wall covered in creeping black vines. She whispered something, and a hidden door creaked open, carved into the stone like it had been waiting centuries to be used again. David, the small boy, stepped inside. The inside of the castle was colder than ice. Shadows dripped from the ceiling like melted tar. Statues lined the halls. All of them frozen fairies in fairy dress, turned to stone. Their expressions were terrified. David's heart beat fast. He tiptoed through the halls, keeping to the edges. The wand glowed just enough to show the path. Suddenly, he heard voices. 2 troll-like guards passed by, dragging chains made of bone. He waited silently until they disappeared into the gloom. Then, through a crack in the wall, he saw it. A massive hall. At the far end stood a dark throne made of twisted iron. Seated upon it was the sorcerer giant himself. He was tall as a tree, with skin like cracked rock and burning red eyes. Around his thick neck hung a glowing gold locket, and inside it, a swirling light pulsed. "The queen's life," Asha whispered from the crack. "That's it!" David, the small boy, also saw something else. Several cages hung from the ceiling. Inside them were dozens of fairies in fairy dress. And in the biggest cage, the fairy in fairy dress queen. Her wings were dim, her crown broken, but her eyes were still full of fire. David clenched his fists. "I have to fight him," he said. Asha gasped. "You can't! He's a monster!" But David had already stepped into the hall. He shouted, "Hey, giant! I'm here to take back what's not yours." The giants blinked in disbelief. "A child? You dare enter my throne room?" David raised the crystal wand like a sword. "Let them go," the giant laughed. "Ascend like thunder cracking rocks. Then fight me, little hero." He stood and raised his hammer. David ran, dodging the strike just in time. The floor cracked. He rolled, came up near the throne, his eyes never leaving the locket. The giant swung again. David jumped, and in midair grabbed the locket with both hands. "No!" he cried. He yanked it from the giant's neck and slammed it to the ground. Crack! The locket shattered. A wave of golden light exploded from the shards, blasting through the hall. The giant screamed. A sound so loud, the walls shook. The dark magic binding the fairies in fairy dress melted away. The queen's cage burst open. The others followed. The bats vanished into smoke. The castle began to tremble. Asha transformed back into her full fairy and fairy dress form, glowing with new strength. "You did it, David, the small boy. You fed us?" The queen floated down and took his hand. "Let us go home," she said. The black castle groaned like a dying beast. Its jagged towers shook. Cracks ran along the stone floor. Dark vines shriveled and turned to ash. The magic that had held it together, evil, bitter, and cold, had been broken by a boy's courage. David, the small boy, stood at the center of it all, chest heaving, face streaked with soot. In his hands were only fragments of the broken locket, glowing faintly before crumbling to dust. "You have broken the giant's curse, not with power, but with heart." The fairy and fairy dress queen held him by the shoulder and said softly, "You have done what no warrior, no spell, no army could do." Asha flew to his side, her wings restored and brilliant once more. Around them, the rescued fairies in fairy dress fluttered with joy, their soft voices singing a tune that echoed through the dark halls like sunlight chasing away fog. Then, in a brilliant flash, the queen raised her hand and called upon the magic of the ring, which now glowed safely on her finger again. "Take us home," she whispered. A shimmering golden wave rolled over the castle. The stone melted into petals. The towers dissolved into sparkling mist. The walls opened like blooming flowers. And suddenly, they were back. And above them, the two moons of the realm glowed in harmony once more. The ground beneath their feet was no longer broken stone, but soft, golden grass. Fairyland was alive again. The lake sparkled with silver water. The flowers opened with laughter. Trees lifted their branches skyward. Fairies in fairy dress soared through the skies, painting clouds and braiding rainbows. The queen stood at the center of the lake with David, the small boy, beside her. Everywhere, fairies sang and danced. The entire realm celebrated its rebirth. David looked around in awe. He had saved it all. "As long as you have them," the queen knelt beside him. "For your courage, we grant you 3 gifts," she said gently. She held out her hand. First came a bouquet of glowing flowers, their petals forever in bloom, never fading. "These are for your brave heart." Second, Asha stepped forward and placed a deep red rose in his hands. "This is for your mother," she said. "A flower that never wilts, never loses its color, so she may always feel the beauty and magic you brought back with you." Asha took his hand, smiled, and said, and third, the queen gave him a small silver mirror, smooth and cold to the touch. "When you look into this mirror with love and longing," she said, "our world will appear, and you may return any time your heart needs us." David, the small boy, was silent. His heart was full. "Thank you," he whispered. "But I should go. My mother is waiting." The queen nodded and raised her wand. The fairies in fairy dress surrounded him one last time, spinning in circles, casting glittering light into the sky. "You are always welcome here. David, the small boy, you are one of us, now." The magical book was gone. As if it had never existed, the queen tapped the ground with her wand. Light bursts upward like a fountain. Soft, golden, warm. And then he was gone. David, the small boy, opened his eyes in his room. It was morning. His books were still stacked by his bed. The floorboard creaked as he stood up. But in his hands, a bouquet of glowing flowers, bright and alive, a red rose, flawless and warm, a silver mirror, quietly gleaming. "Where did you get this?" He stepped into the kitchen, where his mother was stirring porridge. She looked up and smiled. "You're up early, David." He walked to her and handed her the rose. Whenever David missed the fairies in fairy dress, he would take out the mirror, sit by the window, and quietly whisper their names. "This is for you, Mama," she gasped softly, touching the petals. "It's so beautiful," he smiled, eyes full of light. It's a long story. From that day forward, life felt different. Their little cottage seemed brighter. Their garden flourished with colors. Sometimes he would see a flash of light, or hear the laughter of wings in the wind, and he would smile, knowing Fairyland was always near, because of a small boy's heart, full of kindness, courage, and dreams.